Hello everyone, Derek Johnson with Tatango.com. I'm here at Mobile World Congress 2019 in LA with a very special guest, Johathan Morgan, the CEO of OpenMarket. How you been?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, man, I'm good. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover today. First off, OpenMarket, you've worked for them for a long time, right?
Yeah, about 8.5 years.
That's a long time. For the people that don't know what OpenMarket is, give them kind of a general explanation.
So we help companies communicate with their customers across the entire customer journey, and we do that using messaging. And there's different types of messaging. So there's SMS, there's RCS, and then there's other types of channels as well that we're adding in due course. So we're really about helping companies communicate more effectively with their customers. Internally, we say we remove friction, create flow. And what we mean by that is try and take as much of the friction as possible out of that interaction between a company and its customer, and try and make things flow easily. And so we're all committed at OpenMarket to try and make that a little bit better every day.
And the clients you service, US-based, international, both?
So we're probably one of the larger companies in our space, and so we have customers all over the world. Some large businesses from the US, but also some large businesses in other parts of the world as well.
Cool. And metrics, I know you guys are you an owned or a subsidiary of amdocs?
We're owned by amdocs.
Owned by amdocs. Give our kind of viewers an estimate of how big you guys are, OpenMarket, people, or some kind of indication, just so we can kind of scale it up.
So because I'm owned by amdocs, we can't split out financial figures, but we have 300 staff. We handle over 300 billion interactions a month.
Wow,
and
month.
We terminate into, I think, 248 countries and regions of the world.
Wow, that's crazy. What about amdocs? How big of a company is it? I don't know much about amdocs.
So amdocs is a partner of the carriers. So it's built a very successful business. It's listed on NASDAQ. I think its current market capitalization is about $9 billion. And in all of amdocs, there's about 30,000 people, and they're fully focused on helping the carriers and media companies, some financial services companies, just also making their businesses work more successfully.
Wow, 30,000 employees.
It's about 30,000 employees in amdocs.
Wow, and you guys are about 300.
We're about 300 of that.
Okay, and headquartered in Seattle, right?
We're headquartered in Seattle, yep. So
cool. Right down the street, kind of from us.
Exactly.
Yep, okay.
Exactly.
Awesome, that's great. So you've been at OpenMarket for 8 years.
I have.
Many different positions. How did you end up at OpenMarket in the first place?
So I had been bumping into people who worked at OpenMarket for a few years at shows like Mobile World Congress. And I was always impressed with the people I met there. And then I had the opportunity to think about what I wanted to do at a point in my career. And my wife and I were looking to move back to Australia. She's Australian, and we just had our first child. And I actually met up with a chap called Alex Moyer, who used to run MX Telecom, which
I know those guys,
OpenMarket bought in 2010. And he was just joking with me saying, don't you need a job in Australia? Because he knew my wife was Australian. And actually one thing led to another, and I ended up joining OpenMarket as country manager for Australia in 2011.
Where were you moving from at that point?
So I'd actually run a technology business in the UK, and then that had been bought. And then when that had been integrated, I was able to think about what I wanted to do. And I had a number of things I was thinking about doing in the UK where I lived at the time. You can probably tell I'm a Brit. But actually at that point, we wanted to move to Australia to be nearer my wife's mum.
So that's where you started OpenMarket in Australia.
I started at OpenMarket in Australia. Yeah, I started with the Australian business. And we managed to grow that pretty quickly. And then I was asked to see if we could get a business growing in Asia. And so I focused on that for a few years.
Did you move to Asia?
No, I lived in Sydney, actually, in Australia.
Okay.
And the reason...
I guess it's kind of close.
Well, I mean, so often...
Kind of.
Yeah, so often in Asia, it's people base themselves in Singapore.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why people choose Singapore is because it's pretty much in the centre. It's relatively easy to fly anywhere. But from my point of view, my family, I knew would be much happier in Australia. My wife's family is there for a start. My children were growing up there, and we had a strong business in Australia. And so, from my point of view, I felt that as long as I was prepared to travel the extra distance, it was actually better for everyone if I remained in Australia. The other thing as well is because our headquarters is in Seattle, it's actually from a time difference perspective, it's 2 hours nearer Seattle as well. So it helped from that point of view as well.
Okay, so you did Australia, then you opened did you open the business in Asia?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what was the next kind of area?
So when we started setting up connectivity in the key parts of Asia, like India and China and Japan and some other countries as well, and then we were able to build a business on top of that and started to put staff in different parts of the region. And then at that point, if you remember, OpenMarket back many years was really well known for carrier payments.
Yes.
And the carrier payment industry sort of changed and it sort of petered out.
Like premium messaging, right?
Yeah, premium messaging, carrier
ringtones.
messaging. Yeah, and so during that time, OpenMarket moved towards helping bigger and bigger enterprises send messaging globally.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was around the time where we saw an explosion in use cases of big companies using messaging to communicate with customers. And so at that time, we were starting to work with bigger and bigger businesses internally. And I was asked to start focusing on that. So I did Asia, then I started focusing on the bigger businesses. And then just over 2 years ago, I moved to Seattle to actually run the operational side of OpenMarket.
That's, I know you're kind of like skipping over it, but that's a huge jump from, Europe market to then coming to America and becoming the CEO of OpenMarket.
So I actually moved to Seattle and I did an operations job. So
okay.
I had all the functions of the company that touched the customer, other than sales and marketing, reporting up to me. And the focus then was, as we were signing these bigger and bigger customers, and as companies were using messaging more and more, it was about making sure that we were staying, we were meeting our customers, where they wanted us to. And so I did that for a relatively short period of time, and then the opportunity came to step up and run OpenMarket, and I took over in January 2018.
And who's the old Jay, right?
Jay Emmett.
Yep. I knew Jay back in the day.
Who I worked with and for very happily over many years. He decided to step down at the start of last year, and then that gave me the opportunity to step up.
Was that always the goal, to become the CEO of OpenMarket? When did that start this could be an interesting opportunity?
I think it's very dangerous in life to make those sorts of plans. I just, not just in my life, but when I've seen other people in their careers, really hoping to achieve something is, there's so many factors that go into it. But when the opportunity came to step up, I was delighted that people thought that, I'd be the right person to do it. And it's been great.
Yeah. Okay, so what has changed? You've been at OpenMarket for 8 years. Maybe at the company level at OpenMarket, and then just in messaging in general. Well, what do you think the biggest changes?
I think I've seen over the 8.5 years that I've been in this industry, just the explosion of messaging. I think, the number of companies using messaging, some of the bigger companies really using messaging to a huge degree in their business. And the explosion of use cases. So, often when in the early years in the industry, when I was in the industry, people would talk about our messaging is that used for promotional use cases, sort of, encouraging people to buy things.
Only.
And that's certainly one use. But there's so much more you can do across the whole customer journey. And we certainly at OpenMarket see companies using messaging across the full range of that. And I would say that's the thing that I've noticed most.
Interesting. What about the company? Was there a huge explosion in growth in terms of the employees? Anything significant that you noticed at OpenMarket since when you started there? When you started, how many people was OpenMarket?
I think we were, I can't remember exactly, but I think we were just over 200 people.
Okay.
So we're about 300 now, so we've grown quite a bit. Obviously, we were very focused on, as you said earlier, carrier payments in those days.
Yep.
Now we're very much focused on helping companies communicate across the entire customer journey. So, that entails some changes. And, like any company that's been successful, you have to constantly be able to adapt.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think OpenMarket is really good at. And I've seen that with my own eyes in the time I've worked at OpenMarket. We're good at adapting the way we run the company to make sure that we're, keeping up with the industry and what our customers want of us.
That was a huge shift, kind of the premium to essentially in the United States, no more premium.
Yeah.
It was a huge kind of shift for everybody that was kind of in that payment space. Was that hard? Did that come out of nowhere? Did you kind of sense that was coming?
So at that time, myself, I was over in Australia doing that, and so I was a bit less connected with it. But no, the former CEO Jay Emmett foresaw the demise, and put in place what was needed to make sure that we could successfully navigate that, and did a great job. And we moved actually relatively seamlessly from a business that made a lot of its money from looking after content providers and people who wanted to charge for their goods and services via the carrier phone bills, and move towards using the infrastructure to deliver messages on behalf of big companies. So it was actually relatively seamless, but yeah, definitely a very difficult sort of process to go through and make sure that everything remains smooth.
And a lot of businesses went out of business because
Yeah,
they didn't transition
absolutely.
as well as OpenMarket
Yeah,
did.
I think seeing it early was important, and again, that ability to adapt, you see,
Yep.
at that time was certainly put to the test, and I think we came through that with flying colours.
You've worked in messaging in Australia, Asia, and the United States. What's the difference between those countries in the way they see messaging, maybe their adoption of messaging? What's different?
So I think maybe 2 months ago now, I was in China visiting some clients. And if you've been to China recently, you see the explosion of the use of messaging just to conduct their everyday lives. I mean, they're buying everything, they're transacting, they're talking to everybody. It's all on messaging. And I do think that's probably a sign of the future. But generally speaking, across the world, the same things matter no matter which country you're in. It needs to work seamlessly. It needs to be easy for the consumer. And it needs to be easy for the company that wishes to use it. So we try and focus on, of course, making sure that local regional nuances are taken care of, character sets and all these sorts of things that are a feature of our industry. But really, just to try and make sure that it's as easy to use in every country, every territory that we operate.
I've never been to Australia. I know the Chinese.
You should go.
I know
it's really nice.
Beautiful place. We will. Is the Australian SMS market more like the US market or more like the China market, or is it something completely different?
I don't. You know what? We, as I said earlier, we terminate something like 250 parts of the world every day.
Yeah.
And I caution against saying, is it more like this or is it more like that? I just think that the different countries. And I mean, to that question, I don't know if Australia is, similar to one country or similar to another. Every region has its own sort of characteristics. But what we can say, because we see it very clearly, is that messaging's on the rise.
The growth.
All companies are realizing that messaging is a great way to communicate with consumers without disrupting the moment the consumer is in.
Yeah.
We've got busier lives all the time. The idea that we can, spend, hours on the phone trying to resolve something whilst we're trying to do something else, look after the children maybe, or try and, prepare a meal or whatever. Messaging just allows you to get those things done in a very effortless way.
It's so seamless.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the reason why it's, it is growing so fast.
So I have here, you're coming up, I think, on your 2-year anniversary of becoming the CEO of OpenMarket.
Yeah.
Okay, looking back, day one, if you could give yourself advice on day one now, what advice would you give yourself?
I don't know if it would be advice I'd give myself, but I think, the thing I've seen in my career, and I've seen this in all my roles, is, fail fast. The quicker you try things, the quicker you put them out there, the quicker you get feedback. And I think I've seen that, as I say, across my entire career. So certainly OpenMarket, we're trying to do that more and more all the time. Break down the increments of when we release products, get them in the hands of the customers, see if the customers find them as valuable as we believe they will. And that's something I've really seen.
Does that get harder as the company gets bigger and bigger?
It probably does get harder as the company gets bigger, but it's something that's important. Yeah. And so it's a real priority for us at OpenMarket.
Yeah.
It's all about making sure that what we do is something that customers value, and that we've got an accurate read on what they're looking from us on. And the more we can do that as a company, the more successful we'll be.
It's been the biggest win for you personally at OpenMarket, maybe since you've been a CEO.
Yeah, the biggest win. I think one of the successes, which frankly we can all be proud of at OpenMarket, and this is something that has been going on for a while, and I've certainly seen it in my time running the company, is we put a lot of emphasis on our staff, and making sure we've got great talent, that we have a connected workforce, a motivated workforce. And a few years ago, we started to put in place a program around encouraging a more diverse workforce, because we really believe that the more diversity in the business, the better the decision making, the more successful the business. When we look at the metrics internally in terms of the successes we've had, we've really moved the dial.
Cool.
And we're not stopping there. So we want to be a company that attracts the very best talent, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, and orientation. And then when those people come into OpenMarket, we want them to be able to make an equal contribution. And so we're very focused on fostering an inclusive environment. And I would say that's a real success for us, over the recent few years.
That's really cool. What location-wise, I know you're headquartered in Seattle. Does OpenMarket, not amdocs, have like different satellite offices?
We have a number of offices. So we have significant presences in Seattle, as you say, in Southfield, which is near Detroit, in London, in Guadalajara, in Pune, in India, and in Sydney in Australia. And then we've got other satellite offices around where people are based. And then we've also got a lot of people working from home in common with other companies.
Why not have just everybody in Seattle?
We're a global business. I mean, we have to support companies that work on a global scale. We have companies that are based in different parts of the world. To your point, I mean, if you could put everybody in one location, there would probably be some benefits to that. But I simply don't understand how you could do that in a global messaging business.
Because you just have clients everywhere.
You have clients everywhere, and you have areas of the world you have to support, and some are harder than others, and some require very close sort of focus on changes in the maybe the regulations or the compliance framework. And so without regular contact, without people being near those regions or even in them, it would be too hard to manage.
Interesting. Do you know what percentage of OpenMarket is in Seattle?
It is around a third of OpenMarket.
Okay. And then the rest is spread out all over. Interesting. So this one's a hard question for any CEO, including myself. What's been the biggest failure or something you just completely got wrong?
Yeah, I don't know about completely getting wrong.
You won't admit it.
Yeah.
Or was there something you called that it was too early, too late?
No, I mean, to be honest, I come back to what I was saying a moment ago. I think the thing that I've consistently seen of my career is just, faster, doing things faster, getting out to the market faster. The pace of innovation and the pace of sort of technological change is only getting, quicker and quicker. And so, I feel always a real urgency to make sure that we're, adapting as quickly as we can.
Does it almost feel like, I bet there's a lot of failures, but if you fail fast and then you move on to the next thing, it doesn't really matter that much.
You learn the most, don't you, when you get things wrong, let's be honest. And so the key is to try and make the increment, of the change small, and then you can learn faster, and, it's quicker to get onto something that does work.
Yeah, because it's pretty depressing having a 5-year
I don't think you can do that.
And then it blows up or doesn't work.
Nowadays, I just don't know how you could run a business like that, not a technology business. No, I mean, you need, people talk about agile, but you certainly need a process where you can get, things of value into the hands of the customers quickly and often and early. And then, they're the real test. I think it's Jeff Bezos who runs Amazon, obviously, based in Seattle also. I think he says that it's customers adopting innovation that is disruption, not companies launching things that are innovative. And I think, that's absolutely right. I think it's all about seeing what the customers want and tweaking what you're doing to make sure that you're keeping it in sync with, what they're looking for. And so it's only becoming more important.
It's like Google Glass. Just because you put it out there does not mean the consumer is going to adopt it.
Yeah, so many examples. I mean, I think Amazon had the phone, and they used that themselves as an example of learning a lot, but also, not everything works.
Has there been anything that you may put out there and the market hasn't been that interested, but you thought like, oh, this is going to be really interesting?
No, but what I have seen is that sometimes when you're thinking about the proposition, the sort of packaging of the proposition, it takes a bit of iteration to get it to just be right.
To explain it to the customer.
Not just explain it, but actually, you might say, look, here's the proposition, and that's not really, quite as exciting maybe as you're thinking it is, and then you tweak it and you kind of experiment a bit, and then over time you hit the jackpot. And I've seen that many times.
Interesting. That makes sense. Just iterating almost on the message.
Critical, yeah. Critical.
Okay. I see you and a lot of people at OpenMarket talk about empathy.
Yeah.
Explain what this concept is. Why do you adopt this?
Yeah, so the way we view the world is, it's everyone's got busy lives. Everyone's rushing around. Nobody's got the time they maybe used to have. And at the same time, companies, particularly large companies, have sort of found themselves in a situation where often they have silos. So, if like me, you phone a bank and you've got a question maybe with your credit card, sometimes you can find that you're being handed from department to department to try and resolve that. And, where's the empathy gone in terms of the way in which those companies are interacting with their consumers? And so we really want to be part of helping bring that back. Now, when we talk about empathetic, the three aspects that are very important to us is being timely, being meaningful, and being as effortless as possible. And so we really focus everything we do on trying to enable those three features. And so when we say being empathetic, it's as simple as, maybe a text message or something, just the perfect moment to remind you to do something. Or maybe there's a chance you'd forget something. And so, actually saying to you, look, listen, you might have missed this, but it's important to you. Do you want to take action right now? All of those sorts of things are really valuable. On the meaning side, people say to me, can a text message be empathetic? I think it can. I think there's a lot of different ways of writing a text message, for example, even before you add on the extra capabilities of things like RCS or Apple Business Chat or anything else. And I think you can do it in a meaningful way. And I think we at OpenMarket see that when you do it in a meaningful way, you have greater success. And then generally speaking, just trying to make things more effortless. Like I was saying, this concept of removing friction from the interactions, making things flow easily, that's really the overarching aim of what we're trying to do.
So it's really providing almost brands the ability to be empathetic to their customers and not let them kind of provide subpar service or, kind of this roundabout stuff that some people are used to now. Yeah,
I think I would say there's often many ways that companies are communicating with their customers. If they haven't tried messaging, it's really worth trying.
Yeah.
It's really effective. And a company like OpenMarket can help you get the benefit of all that experience of us working with all these other companies around the world. And then if you are using messaging, but maybe you're using it for one or two parts of the customer journey, there's a much bigger world to explore. And there's so many more possibilities and so many ways in which companies are finding success. And again, I would say, reach out and we'd love to take people through what can be done.
Now, RCS, everybody's excited about it. What does it mean to the business of OpenMarket? I know obviously the brands are excited, but does it mean more revenue? Does it mean just a better experience? Can you now sell different things to people? What does it mean to you guys?
Being a business, of course, you're always interested in things that generate revenue. But I think from our point of view, we really see RCS as being almost an environment to support conversations and everything that entails. It's so much more than just messaging, in our view. It's going to support commerce. It's going to support interactions that just aren't even possible over text messaging. It's going to the point we were saying earlier, it's going to take enormous friction out of these interactions, and it's going to drive value for the companies, and it's going to be easier to use for the consumers. So for us, it's a real win-win. We're very excited about it. We've been investing in it for some time, and we're very pleased how it's going.
Do you think the majority of, maybe not your business, but most SMS aggregator business is one way at this point? One-way messaging compared to conversational? And maybe RCS is going to open up this kind of brand new almost channel? It's the same messaging, but it's a different way of using messaging.
So undoubtedly, a lot of messaging is one way, although at OpenMarket we have a lot of two-way use cases with our customers. So we've been doing that for a long time across many, many countries. I think it will certainly help that, but I think almost it's just the fact that it'll take out some of those steps. So when you think about, receiving an RCS message, maybe the ability to sort of scroll through and choose the thing that you're talking about, or maybe the thing you're interested in, you think how many messages backwards and forwards it would be to try and communicate that. You want to buy something, you just click a button.
Yeah.
You want to authenticate yourself to get into something, you just click a button. I mean, this is just taking out many, many key taps and many steps from the process. And generally speaking, we've always seen that consumers vote for less friction.
Yeah.
If you can take friction out of a process, they like it more. And so I think really that's probably the benefit of RCS.
It seems like all the interviews we've been doing, the button, which sounds so ridiculous, is going to be the number one feature for RCS. The button in the RCS message. Do you believe that's kind of one of the game changers? If you could pick one feature, the carousel, the button, the verification, or do you think it really depends on the use case?
I think it depends on the use case. I mean, I think it's probably a bit early to call one feature.
Yeah.
As you're going through them, I can think of huge value in all of them. I mean, you think a carousel, you think, well, that's pretty simple functionality. But again, as I was saying, you think if you're trying to communicate to the brand what the object you're trying to have the conversation about. I mean, even the carousel takes that enormous complexity.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's the simplest feature. And so, no, I think you're going to see value in all of them, and maybe only time will tell.
Don't want to make any estimates right now or guesstimates. What is one use case of RCS, maybe that you pitched or you've seen in action, that you're like, this is how I explain it to my wife? Like, if there was one use case where most likely a regular person would get it, like why this is going to be so interesting and useful, any brands stand out? Even if you don't mention the brand, just tell me how it works.
Well, no, let me talk to you about, I mean, here at the show, we're showing some of the work that we've been doing with ITV, which is a big broadcaster in the UK. And, you know, they have a lot of programs on TV, and they have the audience interacting with the programs. Now, imagine you're interested in a program. There's a whole world around that program of maybe things you can get involved in, products you can purchase. Just think from an RCS message that you can immerse them in that world. You know, from one interaction, you can suddenly open up all those possibilities that they would have. There's no way to do that with a text message.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's just, if I was going to give one example, I think that would be a great example.
Of just kind of, it's almost, we've heard a lot today about, it's almost replacing mobile apps.
I think it is in a lot of ways. I mean, I've heard it described that way a lot. I mean,
because your example is very like, well, a person could sit on a mobile app and interact with the TV, but it's interesting.
But again, you see, it comes back to that point we were saying about taking friction out.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say, well, I'm going to interact with the app, you've got to find the app, you've got to download the app, you've got to remember you've got the app, you've got to open the app. You know, it's in the messaging channel. I mean,
which you already
if you're reaching out to the brand on the messaging channel and then they reply, you know, it's in the same context.
Yeah.
There's no additional step. And so I think that's probably part of its appeal.
That's interesting. What do you think is the future role? I don't even know if you consider yourself like an SMS aggregator. It's almost kind of an older term. You know, now that we're going, you know, OTT, Apple Business Message. Do you guys still consider yourself an SMS aggregator, or is that too limiting?
I think when people use the term aggregator, they probably were describing, you know, a situation maybe a few years ago, to your point.
Yeah.
I mean, from our point of view, a lot of the messages we carry, of course, are SMS, and we see that continuing for a long period of time. There are many advantages of SMS over even these, you know, richer messaging channels that we've spoken about. And one of our roles in the ecosystem is to support the carriers, make sure that they have, you know, trusted brands being using the channel, making sure that the messages are monetized, making sure that their subscribers don't sort of receive any kind of harm. And so our obligation to the carriers within the ecosystem is huge. At the same time, there's different types of channels now. So it's not just looking after, you know, the carrier relationships. To your point, you've also got other OTT channels that need to be supported. And together, it can grow messaging overall. You know, the whole pie can get bigger. At the same time, of course, you know, you're delivering the messages via one sort of route, but then of course you're interacting with the companies on the other route. So in the ecosystem, you do sit between these two, producers and consumers, and in that sense, we're a platform.
Connector
and so,
or something.
Yeah,
yeah.
I would probably describe us more as a platform business than an aggregator. But that crucial role in between. In the middle of the ecosystem, helping balance, you know, the producers and the consumers, I think that continues.
What do you think the next 5 years? What's on the horizon? Obviously, you guys are investing in RCS messaging. Yep. What else are you expanding into different countries? You know, somebody's interested in working for OpenMarket. What are they going to see over the next 5 years? Or a customer of yours?
I think really it comes down to the same thing I was saying earlier, which is how do we focus on removing friction from these interactions between companies and customers every day and everything that entails. So more channels, because if you want to communicate on one channel, you want to make sure that the company is communicating on that channel. Making it easier to create and manage these interactions, because we want all companies to benefit from this capability. And then also, I think there's more value probably to be derived from the data and insights, and then that feeds back into making those interactions more successful in the future. So I think you'll see us pushing ahead on probably those three aspects.
That's cool. And what about international messaging? You guys connect to most countries. Is there any expansion there that you think, or do you have everything you need?
I think inevitably you will see some expansion there. There are certain areas of the world that I think we're likely to to put more staff into.
Okay.
But then also it is an industry where, to the point you were asking me about earlier, you do need to have people in certain regional places, but you don't need to have somebody in every country. That's just not, it's not needed in this industry. And so I think it's a balance.
Okay.
It's about getting, obviously the right number of people in the business, and certainly in certain areas, I imagine we will see some growth.
That's cool. Anything else you want to mention about OpenMarket? Are you guys hiring? Anything that we can help you with?
We are. One of the challenges we have is we're growing all the time. We're always interested in, the best talent. And we also operate in highly competitive environments. As you mentioned, we're headquartered in Seattle. And so
a lot of big companies there.
Yeah, we're always interested in people, talking to us and helping us as we grow. And, if you're passionate about growing the use of messaging, and if you're the sort of person who cares about the quality of the message that comes across to the consumer, making sure that the carriers are protected, I think you can have a great career at OpenMarket.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Again, that's Johathan Morgan, CEO of OpenMarket in Seattle with us. My name is Derek Johnson with Tatango.com. We are at Mobile World Congress 2019 in LA. Thanks everyone for tuning in.